George Clemenceau, French prime minister during the final stages of the war, was already a major political figure before the war, but he is certainly best remembered today for his resolute wartime service as the Tiger and Father Victory. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to a Great War bio special about Georges Clemenceau. He was born in 1841 in Vendée in the west of France. His father Benjamin was a doctor and a Republican and participated in both the 1830 and 1848 French revolutions. This came back to haunt him during the empire of Napoleon III, and he served time for his beliefs and remained under police watch. Young Georges also studied medicine and helped publish a newspaper called The Labor in 1862. It was critical of the regime, and Georges also spent a couple months in jail for his beliefs. Frustrated with his nation's political climate and having finished his thesis, he spent the late 1860s in the U.S. as a journalist and French teacher. It was there he met his wife, Mary Plummer. But when the Franco-Prussian War broke out in 1870 and the French Empire was on the verge of collapse, Georges returned to France. He was there when the empire fell September 4th. The new government chose Georges as mayor of Paris's 18th arrondissement, but he was in a terrible position. The city was under siege and couldn't be supplied or relieved, the two main French armies having surrendered at Sedan and Metz. The peace that was signed in January 1871 infuriated Parisians and eventually led to the Paris Commune. Georges tried to conciliate both Paris and the national government and was dismissed in March. Okay, that's the real short version. Thing is, Georges was trying to avoid a civil war, but if he could not do that, he could at least defend the Republic. He was elected Deputy of Paris in 1876, pledged amnesty for the communards, warned against the return of monarchy, and championed separation of church and state 25 years before it happened. A decade later, it was Clemenceau who was instrumental in preventing a coup by Georges Boulanger, the popular Minister of War. Clemenceau was one of the few deputies that was opposed to French colonial expansion and believed that the national forces should remain in France and prepare for a potential war against Germany, though he never actually called for such a war. His career was derailed for a decade in the 1890s when a large-scale press attack by his opponents accused him of corruption. He even fought a duel over it, one of many duels he fought. But though he was proven innocent, his reputation suffered. It was another scandal that brought him back to politics, the Dreyfus Affair. You'll have to look up the details for yourself, but during the scandal, Clemenceau wrote 665 articles defending Dreyfus, who was finally declared not guilty in 1906. That year, Clemenceau became Minister of the Interior in March and Prime Minister in October. As Interior Minister, he reformed the French police and cracked down on striking workers, notably the miners' strike after the Corrières mining disaster. But there were several other strikes as well. Although he was the most leftist prime minister the Republic had had, this anti-worker action alienated the Socialist Party, the SFIO. But Clemenceau saw his main goal as prime minister as restoring order and confidence to the Republic, and called himself the first cop of France, though to the socialists he remained the strikebreaker. Most of the press called him the Tiger. It was he who introduced the scientific police, mobile brigades, Tiger brigades, and water cannons instead of guns to deal with rioters. He also created cheap accommodation for the poor. His end as prime minister, though, had nothing to do with domestic policy. In 1909, he signed a treaty with Germany over influence in Morocco. Dealing with the enemy was very unpopular. In July, during a discussion on the state of the Navy, bitter words were exchanged between Clemenceau and Théophile Declassé, former president of the Council, whose downfall Clemenceau had helped. Georges did not respond to Declassé's questions and said he'd negotiated with the Germans because France could not begin a fight with them. By publicly claiming France's weakness, he compromised himself, and the Assembly voted his cabinet out 226 to 176. He spent the next 3 years traveling in South America and then returned to France. Worried about the rise of national tensions in Europe, he founded the newspaper The Free Man to articulate his views. When the World War broke out, he was determined to see France victorious no matter the cost. He believed that if France lost, it would become a simple satellite of Germany with no army and no power. He spoke out actively against pacifists and defeatists and accused Louis Malvy, Minister of the Interior, of sabotaging the war effort. Malvy did not share Clemenceau's view that all socialist activists should be jailed. Actually, it was Clemenceau whose relentless propaganda against Malvy led him to resign in 1917. He had accused Malvy of treason, providing information to the Germans, and of supporting the army mutinies. Malvy was cleared of treason charges, but was in fact exiled for disregarding, violating, and betraying the duties of his office. As an editor, Clemenceau was anything but silent. In 1914, he heavily criticized Joseph Joffre's leadership of the French army and, as a doctor, questioned the quality of medical treatment. He saw wounded soldiers receiving no treatment, men getting tetanus from traveling in the same wagon as sick horses, and his newspaper outlined these and other problems. The government accused him of not supporting the war effort and seized the free man. So he published another paper called The Chained Man. See, Clemenceau agreed with military censorship, but not political censorship, and he certainly didn't believe that pointing out medical or military insufficiencies should be punished. After a few years of the war, Clemenceau's legendary inflexibility and rabid nationalism turned him into the solution for the war. He was very much supported by public opinion, and indeed, many thought he was the only chance to win the war. In November 1917, President Raymond Poincaré called for him to take up the post of Prime Minister once more. Clemenceau planned to run things by himself. He chose unknowns as his ministers and only met with them once a week. The army was his main focus, and he named himself Minister of War. His first speech in the Assembly outlined his policies for the coming year. Foreign policy and domestic policy, it is all one. Domestic policy, I make war. Foreign policy, I make war. I always make war. The 76-year-old Tiger was certainly active in that respect. He spent 90 days at the front line in the last year of the war, and even taunted Germans from a frontline trench opposite them. German Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff not only admired him, he said he wished a Clemenceau had emerged in Germany. The challenges, triumphs, and defeats the French would face in the field are covered in our regular episodes, but some of the machinations behind the lines are worth mentioning here. Clemenceau believed that all of the armies on the Western Front should fall under French command. Most of the enemy troops were in France. France had deployed more soldiers than any other nation and had been fighting the war since the very start. In December 1917, he proposed that France take leadership of the new Supreme War Council, but no commander was yet named. The seemingly unstoppable German advance in March 1918 changed that. If Amiens fell, the French and British armies would be split, so it was decided that the British would be under French command for its defense. For Clemenceau, that wasn't enough. He wanted unified command for counterattacks as well. Finally, he got his way, and Ferdinand Foch was named Supreme Commander of the Allies. The reasons for Foch over, say, Pétain, the final days of the war, the decision whether to sign an armistice or invade Germany, the Treaty of Versailles, all of this will be covered in our weekly episodes. Post-war, Clemenceau considered retiring, but many wanted him to run for president of France. He had his enemies, though, certainly the socialists, but also many Catholics who held him responsible for poor relations with the Vatican, and many who simply associated him with rabid militarism. He lost the election in January 1920 and then resigned as prime minister. He spent his last years traveling all over the world and wrote his memoirs and a philosophical work. Father Victory died November 24, 1929, at the age of 88. He was unbending, unyielding, and totally determined, qualities that are often quite negative, but in time of war can be valuable qualities indeed. Thanks to Baptiste Jouot for helping with the research for this episode. And if you want to know more about Philippe Pétain in World War I, you can click right here for that. Follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook for all your dreams to come true. See you next time.